Hello, brethren. We will start our series on Genesis, the book of beginnings. Genesis, the book of beginnings. Genesis means origin or beginning. The first book of the Bible got its name from the translators of the Septuagint. The Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Old Testament done by 70 scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, about 200 years before Christ. The Septuagint, this was the translation read in the synagogue in the first century. Jesus read from it when he stood up in the synagogues in Israel to preach. English translation of the Bible adopted this name. Bereshit is the title given to the book in the Hebrew Bible. The word means in the beginning. In the Hebrew Bible, the books therein are named after the first few words of the particular book. Genesis, this book was written by Moses. Matthew 19, 1 through 8. About 1500 BC. It covered human history from creation to about 1500 BC. Approximately about 2,500 years. Genesis, the first of the books of the Pentateuch or Torah, Genesis to Deuteronomy. Torah, Hebrew for instructions or law. Foundation for everything in the Bible. When the book was written, Moses and his people were in the wilderness and needed an account of the early history of mankind and of their fathers, their forefathers, as they face difficult days ahead. He was guided by the Holy Spirit to write a book of assurance and comfort to the Hebrew people. Genesis is the book of beginnings. The beginning or origin of the universe, Genesis 1, 1 through 25. Man and woman, Genesis 1, 26 through Genesis 2, 1. Sin and death, Genesis 3, 1 through 7. Redemptive promise, Genesis 3, 8 through 24, sacrifice, Genesis 4, 1 through 15, civilization, Genesis 4, 16 through Genesis 9, 29, diverse languages, Genesis 10 through Genesis 11, the Hebrew nation, Genesis 12 through Genesis 50. Outline of the book of Genesis. Earliest history of the human race, Genesis 1 through 11. Life of Abraham, Genesis 12 through Genesis 25:18. Life of Isaac, Genesis 25, verse 19 through Genesis 26, verse 35. Life of Jacob, Genesis 27 through Genesis 36. Life of Joseph, Genesis chapter 37 through Genesis chapter 50. Major issues in Genesis. The promise made to Abraham, Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 4. The great nation, the national promise. The land of Canaan, the land promise, that through his seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, the seed promise. All the promises made to Abraham have been fulfilled. God keeps his promises. Major issues in Genesis. The truth of the creation story. Jesus referred to it as factual. Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. The worldwide flood. Jesus and the New Testament writers referred to it as a factual event. Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 and 38. First Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 21. Second Peter chapter 2, verse 5. Note, those who referred to the creation story and the worldwide flood as Jewish mythology are ignoring the implication of their position. Furthermore, to not believe in the creation story and the story of the flood is to not believe that Jesus Christ was the infallible, omniscient Son of God, since he referred to these events as having actually occurred. If Jesus is wrong about this, he is not the Son of God. He is not God. Hence, our religion would be false and invalid. 10 key lessons or points of interest in Genesis. Number one, God is a promise keeper. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. And 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. Note verse 9. Number two, the gospel was preached in the Old Testament. Galatians chapter 3, verse 8. Also, Genesis 12, the 12th chapter, verse 3. Number three, God rewards us for faithfulness. Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. Also, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. Homosexuality is unacceptable to God. Genesis 19, and note verses 24. Also, Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 24. Verse 24 says, Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Lessons from Genesis. Number 5, the story of Noah and the worldwide flood is an actual event that took place Genesis chapter 6 through 9. Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 through 39. Number 6, Noah and his family were saved through water in the ark, while Christians are saved through water in the church. First Peter chapter 3, verses 21. All things, number 7, work together for good. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, and Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Lesson number 8, God holds man accountable for the welfare of his family. He is the head. Genesis chapter 3, verse 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23. Number 9. When Abel offered his sacrifice, he offered it by faith. Genesis chapter 4, verse 4. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. Number 10. The house of God is the church of the living God, the church of Christ. It is the gateway of heaven. Genesis chapter 28, verse 17. Also, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. Conclusion. Genesis is the book of origins or beginnings. It sets the stage for the great story of man's redemption through Jesus Christ. It covers most of the years covered by the Old Testament period. Remarkable indeed. We will start next Tuesday with the second book in the Torah, Pentateuch, the book of Exodus. May the Lord guide you and bless you and keep you safe in the Lord. Praise and blessings, everyone.